Have you ever heard the real story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs? Not the Disney version filled with singing birds and a charming prince, but the dark, mysterious, and original fairy tale written centuries ago. A story filled with jealousy, revenge, and a magic mirror that spoke the truth. Today, we're diving deep into the original story of Snow White, as told by the Brothers Grimm, a tale far more chilling and powerful than you could ever imagine. So, grab your headphones, turn down the lights, and get ready to hear the true, original version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. If you love exploring the real origins behind famous fairy tales, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support helps us bring more forgotten stories back to life. Now, let's begin our story. Long, long ago, in the heart of winter, as snowflakes gently kissed the ground like tiny pearls from heaven, a queen sat by her window sewing. The window frame was made of black ebony wood, and as she sewed, she pricked her finger with the needle. 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow-white cloth, and the bright red drops looked so beautiful against the white snow that the queen sighed softly and said, "Oh, how I wish I had a child, with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." Not long after, her wish came true. She gave birth to a baby girl so beautiful that she named her Snow White. But sadly, the queen did not live long after her daughter was born. The king, heartbroken and lonely, soon remarried. A woman of breathtaking beauty, but one whose heart was as cold as ice. This new queen was proud, cruel, and full of vanity. She had a secret, a magic mirror, and every day she would stand before it and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And every day, the mirror would reply, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." Those words pleased her greatly, for as long as the mirror said she was the fairest, her pride was safe, and so was her wicked heart. As years passed, Snow White grew up, innocent, kind, and radiant with beauty. Her skin shone like fresh snow. Her lips glowed red like a rose in bloom, and her hair shimmered black as polished ebony. One day, the queen stood before her mirror and asked as usual, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" But this time, the mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White is fairer than you." The queen's heart stopped. Her face turned pale with rage. From that moment on, she hated Snow White with a burning jealousy. She could not stand the thought of anyone being more beautiful than her. Day by day, her hatred grew stronger, until one morning, she summoned a huntsman and said in a cold, trembling voice, "Take the girl deep into the forest, kill her, and bring me her heart as proof." The huntsman obeyed. He led Snow White into the dark forest. But when he raised his knife, Snow White fell to her knees and cried, "Please, kind huntsman, spare my life. I will run away and never return." The huntsman took pity on the innocent girl. He couldn't bring himself to harm her. Instead, he told her to flee far into the woods, and to never, ever return to the castle. To deceive the queen, he killed a wild boar and took its heart to her instead. The queen believed it and smiled with wicked delight. Snow White ran and ran through the dark forest. The branches scratched her face. The wolves howled in the distance, and the shadows of the trees seemed alive. At last, exhausted and trembling, she came upon a tiny cottage deep in the woods. The door was unlocked, so she stepped inside. Everything was small and tidy. 7 little chairs, 7 plates, 7 cups, and 7 tiny beds lined neatly in a row. Hungry and tired, Snow White ate a bit of bread and vegetables from each plate, drank a sip of water from each cup, and finally lay down on the smallest bed and fell fast asleep. When night fell, the owners of the cottage returned. 7 dwarfs who worked all day in the mountains mining gold. When they entered, they noticed things were not as they left them. "Who's been sitting in my chair?" said one. "Who's been eating from my plate?" said another. And when they reached their beds, they saw Snow White sleeping peacefully. The The dwarfs gasped. "What a beautiful child," they whispered. They didn't wake her, but let her sleep through the night. In the morning, when she woke and saw them, she was frightened. But they spoke kindly and said, "Do not be afraid. Who are you?" Snow White told them everything about her wicked stepmother and how she had fled into the forest. The dwarfs listened and then said, "If you will stay with us and keep our house, cook, clean, and sew for us, you may live here safely. But beware, never let anyone in when we're not home." Snow White gratefully agreed, and so began her peaceful life among the seven dwarfs. Back at the castle, the wicked queen stood before her mirror once again. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains, with the seven dwarfs, is fairer still than you." The queen screamed in fury. She realized the huntsman had deceived her. In a rage, she plotted revenge. Using dark magic, she disguised herself as an old peddler woman. Then she filled a basket with brightly colored ribbons and laces, and set out into the forest. When she reached the dwarf's cottage, she knocked on the door. "Good day, my dear," she called sweetly. "Won't you buy some pretty laces?" Snow White, forgetting the dwarf's warning, opened the door. The old woman smiled and offered to lace up Snow White's dress. But she pulled the laces so tight that Snow White couldn't breathe, and she fell to the floor, unconscious. When the dwarfs returned that evening, they found her lying still. They quickly loosened the laces, and Snow White gasped for air and came back to life. She told them what had happened, and the dwarfs warned her again, "Be careful. The queen will try again. Never open the door when we are away." The next day, the queen once again stood before her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" The mirror replied, "Snow White beyond the mountains, with the seven dwarfs, is still fairer than you." The queen's rage knew no bounds. She disguised herself again, this time as an old peasant woman, and made a poisoned comb soaked in deadly magic. When she reached the cottage, she called out, "Beautiful combs for sale. Lovely combs for a lovely maiden." Snow White hesitated, but the old woman looked harmless. So she let her in and took the comb. As soon as the comb touched her hair, Snow White fell to the ground, motionless once again. When the dwarfs came home, they found her lifeless body, removed the comb, and once more she breathed again. Tears filled her eyes. She promised never to disobey again. But the queen did not stop. She went to her mirror and asked once more, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And once again, the mirror answered, "Snow White beyond the mountains, with the seven dwarfs, is still fairer than you." The queen clenched her fists and hissed, "Then she shall die once and for all." She disguised herself as a poor farmer's wife, and crafted her most wicked weapon yet, a poisoned apple. One half of the apple was white and harmless, but the other half was coated with deadly poison. She went to the dwarf's cottage and called softly, "Apples for sale. Sweet apples." Snow White peered out. "I must not let anyone in," she said. But the old woman smiled kindly. "Then take this apple," she said. "I will eat the white half, and you may eat the red." Seeing her eat, Snow White took a bite. The moment the fruit touched her lips, she fell dead to the floor. This time, the queen was sure of her victory. When she asked her mirror again, it finally replied, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." The queen laughed with evil joy. Her heart was darkly satisfied. When the dwarfs returned home that evening, they found Snow White lying lifeless on the floor. No breath escaped her lips. No heartbeat could be heard. They wept bitterly. For 3 long days they kept her body, hoping she would awaken, but she did not, because her skin was still as white as snow, and her lips still red as blood. They could not bear to bury her. So they made a glass coffin, laid her inside, and placed it high on a mountain, where the sun moon, and stars could shine upon her. They carved her name upon the glass. Snow White, the fairest of them all. Then they stood guard, day and night, grieving for their beloved friend. One day, a young prince was riding through the forest. He saw the glass coffin, and the most beautiful girl he had ever seen lying within. He was struck by her beauty and purity. "Please," he said to the dwarfs, "let me take this coffin to my castle. I cannot live without seeing her again." The dwarfs were reluctant, but seeing his heart so full of love, they agreed. As the prince's servants lifted the coffin, they stumbled on a rock, and the piece of poisoned apple that was stuck in Snow White's throat flew out. She coughed and opened her eyes. The dwarfs gasped. The prince dropped to his knees. Snow White looked around, dazed. "Where am I?" she whispered. "You are with me," said the prince softly. "You are safe now." Overjoyed, the prince asked her to return with him to his castle. He declared his love and asked her to marry him. Snow White agreed, and soon a grand wedding was arranged. The wicked queen, meanwhile, stood before her mirror once more. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but the young queen, Snow White, is fairer still than you." The queen trembled. Snow White alive? Married? A queen? She screamed in rage, but decided to attend the wedding anyway, curious to see this young queen who had outshone her. When she entered the hall and saw Snow White alive and radiant, she froze in terror. Her face turned pale, her heart pounded, and before she could flee, she was seized and punished for her wickedness. In the original Grimm version, she was forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she fell dead. And thus, evil met its own end. Snow White lived happily with her prince, surrounded by love, kindness, and peace. The seven dwarfs visited often, and the land was filled with laughter once more. Her story became a symbol of innocence conquering jealousy, of kindness defeating cruelty, and of truth shining brighter than vanity. The tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs reminds us all that no matter how dark the forest, how cruel the heart, or how deep the sleep, true goodness will always awaken. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the original, darker version of Snow White,